Welcome to another Watercolours with Caroline, and this week we're going to paint some glass vases, and you have a choice. You can paint one on its own, or you can paint three in a row, 5 by 7 or 8 by 10. It's up to you. And the photo is by A.R. Mason from the Facebook group Free Reference Photos for Artists. So if you want to look for the picture for yourself, just go onto Facebook if you have an account. Go to Free Reference Photos for Artists, and under A.R. Mason or under Glass Vases, you will find the photo that I used. There are some beautiful photos on there. So you will need either Phthalo Green or Viridian Green really to get these vases looking the right color. And a Prussian Blue or a Phthalo Blue is very helpful. So get those colors ready, get your paper ready, and let's paint. Now, I've only done the one with the three vases. So when I'm demonstrating, I've drawn just the single vases. So I drew a single round one, a single straight-sided one, and somewhere I have the other one. I don't know what I've done with it. And if you wanted just the single straight-sided one, I didn't do a single drawing of that one. But you can, let me find my drawing. I have it here somewhere. So this drawing, I put my 5 by 7 paper across the straight-sided one, just like that on my light board. And it just fitted into my 5 by 7 paper perfectly. I just didn't draw the other vases. So if you need the straight-sided one, and this is how it turned out on 5 by 7 paper. Just from this one, so you've got them all there as well as a couple of single ones. So your choice. You could do a triptych of all three separate. You could do three and then one on each side. They all have exactly the same sort of color notes. So I'll start on this one here, I think. I'll keep my other ones close by. And the first thing we need to do is make up that lovely grey for the background, that really soft grey. Well, I've got a couple here. Who knows? What one shall I do? What one shall I do? Let's think about it. Anyway, first of all, let's try some colours out. Find yourself just a little bit of scrap paper so you get exactly the right colour before you put it on your paper. And we need to use Prussian Blue if you have it. Now, if you don't have Prussian Blue, then you can probably make do with some Phthalo Blue. So it's very similar. This is Prussian Blue here. And then I'll put some Phthalo Blue here so you can kind of see. They're both a very cool blue, but they add a bit more. I think they actually add some black pigment to the Prussian to get it a little bit darker. So if you don't have a Prussian, you could use a little bit of Payne's Grey with your Phthalo Blue, and you could come very, very close to the Prussian. Anyway, we need some of that. And then some Cobalt Blue to warm it up a little bit, as we don't want it too cool, because the vases are very cool. And then we're going to grey it down with the raw sienna. And getting the grey just right is the tricky part, and you don't want to start painting until you get this mixture in the right ratio. So now it's looking pretty green. That's because of the cool Prussian Blue. So I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt to warm up that grey. A little bit more raw sienna. And it'll look pretty dark here, but I have to add a lot of water to that. I think I want a little bit more cobalt, a little bit more raw sienna. I don't want it too cool. I don't want it too green. And water, then I've got to add water. And then when I've added a lot of water, I'm going to try it on my paper to see what it looks like. So see, mine, I think mine's still looking a little bit green. So what I might do is add a tiny bit of permanent rose to see if I can get it a little less green. That's always a good fix. So let's see. Now I know I didn't have add rose in my notes, and I just want to compare. I just want to compare what I have here on this one. I might just need a little bit more cobalt blue, so I'm going to go with a little bit more cobalt blue. A little bit more water. I had to have it very, very watered down. I'm going to give it another go. And I think that's a bit closer. Maybe I won't add the rose. Maybe just adding a little bit more cobalt and a little bit more water got it close enough, I think. I'm just checking. I think I'd add a touch more cobalt. I want it in the same value, sort of, not value, same range as the greeny blue glass, but I want it to be different enough that it goes into the background a little bit warmer. So the cobalt blue is a warmer blue, adding a little bit more water, and that will warm up the gray.
This is for the background, right?
This is for the background, yeah. We need to get it really good, a really good color for the background so that we're starting out with the best background color we can.
It looks very green on this.
It does, yeah, it looks very green. So that's why I'm wanting to, I'm feeling like I may add the tiniest bit of rose, because rose is going to pull the green back a little bit. So I've just added a little bit there. Yeah, so I've added just a touch of rose, and I think that's just grayed it down a little bit more. I've got space on my test sheet here. And a bit more water. I can't emphasize how much water you need with this background color. See, I've added a ton more water. And it's extremely pale, as you can see, very, very pale. So that means a lot of water going into that mix. I just added a couple of dabs more. And maybe one little more dab of rose. And I might have, yeah, you see, I have to be very careful I don't go too pink with the grey, but that's okay. I added a couple of little tiny dabs of rose, and I might modify my notes, or you could modify your notes to say, maybe add a touch of rose. And that, see how very watery that is? We need to have a lot because we've got to cover quite a lot of paper, depending on the size you're doing. If you're covering a whole 8 by 10, you'll need a lot. If you're doing the 5 by 7, I've probably got just about enough for the 5 by 7. And because I want to make sure, let's zoom in a little bit. I want to make sure that I don't have streaks and so forth. So I'm going to, I don't mind if my water's a little bit grey, it's not actually. I'm going to wet most of the paper at the top, not below the vase, but I'm going to be very, very careful not to get too close to that flower or the vase or anything like that. I'm sort of wetting the paper away from there, but the big bits, just to help me get a nice even wash on. And then I want to start with my number 10 brush. I think a number 10 or number 8 brush. And then when you're loading up your brush with the paint, you know, you really got to roll your brush in that paint so it's really full of paint. You don't want to be struggling to get paint on your paper. And then remember the flat wash. We need to sort of go in side to side. And then when I come up to this flower, which is dry, I have to just use the point of that brush to get into those little areas around the flower. So those are the difficult parts, getting into the edges around the dry flower. And the vase, of course, you want your background to be background. And you have to work fairly fast, because if anything dries up, you're going to get dry lines. Like over here, I've got to be very aware that I could get over here some dry lines if I'm not quick. Just coming up the side of the stem with the point of my brush, carefully around the lid of the rim of the vase. And down the other side carefully. Like a little dry spot there. Now when I put my purple flower on, I can push the edges of my purple flower out into the grey, so I don't have to worry too much about that. If I want a soft edge where the grey meets the white, I can use a clean damp brush to just run a little bit of water along that edge if I want it a bit softer, the transition. And I'm going to take a little bit of that grey and I'm going to put in the first shadow. There'll be a bit more shadow afterwards, after we get the greens, but just the first shadow in there. Just tiny. The shadows on the photo are not very big. There's not much shadow, so and if your grey is really nice and light, that's good. It will dry a little bit lighter. Let's see, I've got this other one. While you're catching up, I'm going to do this other one because I want to show you the flower at the front with this one. I didn't put my white line in here. So again, I'm going to add to this one, I'm going to add a little bit more, just a little bit more raw sienna. Wet around most of the background. And load up my brush. Now the reason I wanted to do this one is because this one you can see the center of the flower, so I wanted to be able to demonstrate that if you have one with a yellow center. This one had very little shadow, a tiny bit. And I'm going to go across that line just with the damp brush again so it's not too harsh. And there's just an area there. And that's that one. Now the flowers have a yellow, quite a bright yellow center, but you can't see it too well in the photograph. And because of the lighting on the photograph and maybe a filter, it's not showing up very yellow. So I took some artistic license, and because I really, really wanted that complementary of the purple and the yellow, I emphasized the yellow centers on the ones that you could see the center. So the yellow centers would be one of your bright yellows like cadmium yellow or azo yellow, or you know, a nice bright yellow. And pretty simple direct painting, just while everything's at the first stage, just putting in that yellow center if you have the flower that's facing you. Now the one that's facing away, you can't see the yellow center, and this one I would still put it in because it is there, it just doesn't show up too well on the photograph, that's all. And I think it's just lovely to have a quick splash of warm color in a very, very cool painting. Where's my... Even on this one, where it faces away from you, I still did a tiny bit of yellow at the edge. So I'm going to do that on this one. And even if it bleeds into the gray a little bit, I don't mind. I'm just going to put it on that edge, and it will give a little warm spot to the painting. Right, so while I'm just waiting for that to dry, I'm going to work on mixing the blue-green for the vase. So let's bring my mixing tray over. What I had here was I had some Phthalo Blue with a little bit of Payne's Grey in to make something that's like a Prussian Blue. So I can still use that. I don't have to get rid of that. And let's get a mixing brush. I can put a little bit of Prussian with it. And again, we're going to have to use a lot of water for our first layer. And then I'm going to get a little bit of my Phthalo Green. And like I say, you can use, if you have turquoise, you can use that. I have a little bit of turquoise here. I don't use turquoise very often, but turquoise is almost exactly the color of, you can see, of the vases. Probably need a little bit of blue added to it. So it's, you know, turquoise is kind of like a Phthalo Blue mixed with a Phthalo Green. I'm going to add a little bit more Phthalo Green to this, and a lot of water, because those are two very strong colors, very strong. A little bit of water, and then I'm going to test that out and see what I've got. And that's pretty good for the first layer. I want to go in with the very, very light color for the first layer. I might add, I'm going to add a tiny bit more Prussian, a bit more blue to it. And what you have to remember is they stain. Phthalo Green, Phthalo Blue, Prussian, they all stain. So you've got to get it right before you put it on the paper, because you're not going to be able to wash these back. And the first layer needs to be really, really light. I just keep adding water to lighten it up. We're going to do 3 layers with the greeny blue color. The first really, really light layer, and then a second layer of this color again on the darker areas, and then we're going to add a little bit of Payne's grey and maybe a little bit of violet for the really, really dark accents. And the key, of course, is to have, this is what we're going for, this very light color here, and then this is like second layer here, and then we want these really, really dark parts around that border that are going to make it look like glass, like the rest is reflective and transparent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure with my hairdryer, while you're catching up with all of that and mixing your color, I'm going to make sure it's absolutely dry before I put any other color on there. So give me a minute to give those a dry. Now I need to pay very close attention to where the white sort of are in the reflection. There's white along the rim of the vase here, so I don't want to paint that. There's a little sliver of white under here and around here. I'm not going to use masking fluid. I hate it. It always goes all globby. I'm going to really be careful to leave those areas just white. I can always put a little bit of PH Martin's white on afterwards if it doesn't get left white. So I won't fuss too much. And I want to go in with the, let's see what size brush I'm going to use. Got to be a little bit more careful with this layer. So I'm going to start with a number 6 brush and see if that will give me enough control. And actually, you know what? Having said that, I'm going to have a number 2 brush as well, because I want to start on the rim here where it's very, very small and delicate. So it's going to be a little sliver just here, and I'm going to leave the white. And remember, this is our lightest layer now, so I'm going around carefully with the point of my number 2 brush and putting the rim of the vase on first. And then what I want to leave is a sliver of white underneath that. Now you can paint right over where the dark pieces are going to go. The only places you really need to leave white paper is where the whites are going to be. If you find that too difficult, don't worry, put in the whites afterwards with some white PH Martin's or gouache or something. I always think that looks so much nicer than big globs of masking fluid. So I've done that small area. I'm going to switch back to my number 6 brush to put some of the other areas in. Now I've got to remember where I want the white. That's important. I want some white here. And I am going to paint around the stem. The stem's quite dark, but I'm going to leave it so I can have it the color that I would like. And there's very light reflection here, so I'm going to leave that white too. There's no need to hurry. These are very small areas, so you can usually get your paint on without it drying, without getting any lines. And you can see like, I don't know if you can see how watery my mix is and how strong it looks on my vase. I'm going to have to water it down even more for the very light part under here. It's still too strong for the lightest part. Some white highlights at the edge. And that the white reflection only goes up to about there. So I'm going to water that down a lot more. I feel it's too strong for all this light area in here. That's better. I've got it quite light now. And down here it's almost white. So what I'm doing is I'm wetting this area here because it might fade out to white there. I'll show you my diluted paint. It's so light. And I put the wet paint at the bottom, so it should just sort of fade out to very, very light at the bottom there. Anytime you don't want a color to bleed into another color, just leave the lightest of unpainted paper. The sizing, if you've got decent paper, the sizing on your paper will prevent the paint bleeding over that little tiny dry piece. And we're going to go back in our third layer and put some very dark paint on those places anyway, so that will be fine. And then we've got that first layer of the green blue glass. And I'm going to do both my vases. I have another one here. Oh, I found another one there too. Because I'm sure while you're painting, I can work on these. Grab my photo as well, just to make sure I know where the whites are. Same thing, there's a little bit of greeny blue there. The drama comes when we put in the darks. And we're going to have to go pretty dark when we get to the dark layer to make it dramatic. I think some of this one's going to be a lot easier to put in the white in afterwards, I'm thinking. Or touches of the white. Before I get down to the part in the middle here, that's very light, I'm just going to wet it slightly so I get a soft transition when I get down there. And I've gone to a slightly darker mix for the top of this because it is a bit darker on the top. And then just like the other bottle, it gets much lighter at the base part before, well, in the lower part here. Again, I'm going to put a little bit of water on the paper so that it sort of fades from the light color down into white. And I don't have to worry too much at the bottom because it's quite dark. And pop that in. So it all looks a bit pale and nondescript at the moment, doesn't it? Like pale grey and pale green. It doesn't look like much. It's not till the final stages that you really punch it all up with the dark colours. As you can see here, like the dark purples, the dark stem, the dark reflections on the glass, and a little bit more of the lilac and the bluey green shadow under the vase. I got a couple more spots on my testing paper, and that's to make the lilac for the flower. You've got lots of choices for that. If you have a violet in your palette, then you can use that. Dioxazine violet's a really good one. I often mix rose with any of the blues to make a pretty violet, and we're going to do a double coloured violet too. You don't see it very much in the photo. I'll grab some of these photos. You can't see much of it's very blur, very just violet. You can see a little bit of variation on this one, but what I put in mine was much more variation. I put in a violet that was much more rose to start with on the outside, and then wet in wet I added a violet that was much more blue and more dark on the inside, so that I wanted to have more variation, which I think you would see if you looked at the flower in nature for reality, but I think a lot of the photography process and the lighting and the filters maybe have sort of dulled that down a little bit. So I wanted to just dramatize it up again. Let's grab this one. You can see it even more in this one. I wanted to dramatize that kind of rosy edge to it, and then the wet and wet violet on all of them. And I think with the blue-green vase, having that rosy edge is a really nice complement to the painting. So you'll be needing your rose for sure, whatever rose you use. Quinacridone Rose is a great one. And we're going to mix some violets ready to do that kind of wet in wet look. And I'm going to grab myself a clean palette, bring it over here, and just pull back a little bit so you can see a little bit better. And some clean water. And the first thing I want to have is just some rose, so that I've got some rose to dig into that's nice and bright. And then I want to make a soft violet with the rose and the cobalt blue. The cobalt blue is a very soft blue, so that That makes, and that's a very rosy violet, lots of rose, a little bit of cobalt. And then I want to make another one, which is Quinacridone Magenta and Cobalt Blue, and see what that one looks like. Let's grab some magenta. And some cobalt. And that's going to make us a more, like a deep, like a dioxazine violet. And if we wanted to go even more dioxazine violet, we could go either rose or magenta with phthalo blue. And that's going to give you pretty much a dioxazine violet, a really transparent staining violet that's more bluey. So we've got a few different ones there. I will also put, I have a dioxazine violet here. I'll put that here too so you can see. You can see how similar it is to the Quinacridone Magenta with the phthalo blue, and this is the dioxazine violet right here. Really rich, very, very staining. You can use that too if you want to. It's totally up to you what one you use. They're all perfectly usable, fine for this. What we do want to test is just test the colors. So I want the Quinacridone Rose with the Cobalt Blue here to see that kind of soft pinky violet. And then I want to test the Magenta with the Cobalt Blue, a more blue violet. And then of course you can test the other deeper ones. This is the deeper one with the Phthalo Blue and the actual dioxazine violet itself. So all of those are good. You could use all 4 of them or just a couple. And sometimes if it doesn't go violet enough in the first layer, you can add a little bit more in the second layer. Let's zoom in again. I'm looking at mine still, and I don't like that I added the rose to the background grey. If you can actually see now, mine are dry. The greeny grey was fine, and I'm not that keen on the more rosy grey that I mixed. I think I liked when they dry, it's such a difference. You can see like the greeny grey is fine, but it's okay. I got a slightly different look for this one, that's fine. So how are we going to do the little flower? Well, what I want is I want a sort of a halo of rosy colour on the outside. Do a little bit more. So where the flower comes into the grey on the outside, I want to put a little bit of rose there. And I don't want that to dry too much. I'm going to get my violet, that is the rose and the cobalt, so the sort of rosy violet, and I want to put that on while that rose is still wet, and bring it up to that yellow center. Got my little number 4 brush. I want to get quite a bit of wet paint on, so I think the small brush would be too small. I'm taking a little bit of rose again around the outside, and the violet that is, now I'm dipping into the violet that is magenta and cobalt. It's darker. And I'm going with little tiny brush strokes to make the edge of the flower with those little bits sticking out, little petals just sticking out. I've also got some green leaves there, so I've got to leave the green leaves till later. And when this dries, it looks quite dark on the camera, but when it dries, a couple of little touches in the yellow. When it dries, it might lighten up a little bit, and I might want to put a little bit more bluey purple closer to the center of the flower or on one side. So that's the one that's facing me. I'm going to do the one that's sort of facing away with the same sort of process. So I have my Quinacridone Rose. I'll bring my tray over. I like you to see my tray, but it does get in the way of my elbow when I'm painting. And on the side that's sort of facing out to the yellow, I want to get the rose on first. And then the one that's rose with cobalt blue, sort of the lighter violet color. And I want to go into the deeper one. I'm going into, actually now I'm going to go into the Quinacridone Magenta and the Phthalo Blue, the really deep one, and put that on the darker side. And I was got to leave some room for the leaves. And just let them kind of blend wet in wet, do their thing. I have a couple of little leaves coming out into the yellow. And of course, while we're doing this, it's giving the bottle time to dry so that we can do a second layer. I have a couple bit more sticking out there. And it will dry, it looks really dark on the camera, but it will dry lighter than that. And I might need to put a little bit more dark on there when that is dry to give it a little bit more drama. I don't know if you can see with this one. When this one had dried, I need to put a little bit more dark in the center. It was too light. I would just wait and see how it dries up. And then let's pull back a little bit and have a look at them. This one's still kind of bleeding into the rose quite nicely. And then I'm gonna whisk my hairdryer over the bottles again to make sure they're good and dry for the next layer of dark green. There. It didn't take much drying because there wasn't a lot of wet paint on there. And I need to switch back to my palette with my greeny blues on it. And for the next layer, we're just going to use exactly the same greeny blue that we mixed. So we don't need to, unless you needed to mix a bit more up, we don't need to do too much to it. We just need to be putting more on where it's darker, that's all. Where it is darker on these vases. So it's darker at the top of all three. Like, we're not going to paint any more on the bottom here until we get to the dark areas. That's all our first layer. But this area in here is slightly darker. Look at this one where you kind of got this dark coming down here and then this light going up here. Now it's going to be tricky to do. We're going to see if we can do that with, with a little bit of wet back behind it, but it's very tricky. So we'll see if that works or not. And on the neck of the bottle is a little bit darker. So we're going to have to darken up a few spots. And we can put this shape in dark, because you can see it's dark here, and then we're going to have to do a third layer of real dark at the bottom of this shape. If you're doing that vase, that kind of half moon shape here, that's going to need a second layer and then a third layer. So we'll do those. We'll worry about the stems and the leaves, we'll worry about those last or coming up to last because they can be done much later. And I know they kind of go through the green here, but we can do that by adding some water to the stem as we go through that. Just trying to paint it over the top of the blue is just going to make it even darker. So I've got that in front of me just so I can watch what I'm doing. I'm going to use my number 4 brush and get the same mix that I had, the Prussian with the Phthalo Green. Make sure I got enough. And I'm just going, I've got my testing here. Just testing it. See, when you put another layer over the dry layer, you're going to get double darkness there. Same color, but 2 layers will darken it up. And I will start, I'm going to start just around the neck of the bottle here. It's quite a bit darker. Put it at the front. And then put this on. I've managed to get that little bit of light coming up here. I was hoping to sort of wet it in to soften it, but that's just going to soften it too much. I'm going to lose too much of that transition, so just going to leave it dry there. And darker along here, and there's a little bit on this bottle, a little bit of shadow here, and I am going to use a wet brush to soften that in right there. A little bit here. It's the little details that make glass look like glass, those little shadows and shading. A little bit up against this light here. I'm going to put that in. And then wet brush, I will soften that in. Coming down here. And at this point I have the bluey green on my brush, and I'm going to add some tiny bit of the bluey green shadow here. Just so we have a little bit of the reflection on the white surface. Now it is a little bit darker here. Add a little bit there. And I'm going to add a little bit of Prussian Blue to my mix. Just a little bit more because I want to go a little, oops, I only added the tiniest bit and it's quite dark. Minimal bit here, just to try and get a little bit more of that dark look here before we go into the dark. Oh, and I tell you another place I see not a dark line, but a darker line. Right here, I guess it's the bottom of the vase where the glass starts. A little bit of a line there. Get that edge a little bit darker. The edges quite often need to be quite strong, quite defined. Adding a little bit more. You see, I'm just adding a little bit more. You can see right here, I put a little bit of Prussian blue into that mix, a tiny bit, and I'm adding a few accents here and there where I can see it's a little bit darker. Now you have to be really, really careful because I'm working on damp paper, which can sometimes leave some really nasty marks if you're not very, very careful. So I'm getting to the point now where I shouldn't be doing any more to this. I should be letting that layer dry. But while you're catching up, I'm going to do it on this bottle so you can see it again if you're like, what did you do? Here we go with this one. I like this round bottle, really nice. So starting with the neck of the bottle, that is quite a bit darker. And in this one especially, it's quite a bit darker in this photo. Let's get that in. And this side will be even darker, but we can put some dark on here. But it comes down around the edge very, very light. So I just want to do it at the top here. And then I'm gonna, what have I got here for my brush? I have my number 4. I think I'm gonna switch to my number 6 for the bigger part of the vase up here. And it looks so much dramatically darker, doesn't it? But I mean, look at the mix I have. It's so watered down. It's just incredible how a tiny bit of paint can look so dark. And I'm just taking a wet brush to soften the edge just here. And I switched to the number 6 brush because this is quite a big area to get in wet so I don't get streaks and brush marks. And I'm going to add a little bit more green, a little bit more phthalo green to it. There's this much more greeny tinge to this side. So I just added the tiniest amount of phthalo green to just change up that side to a more greeny color. Now I'm regretting now putting that wet in there because it's sucking up too much of the color. I'm going to take it out again with a wet brush. It's really hard because I want the transition to be soft, but as soon as I put the wet in there, the paint creeps down into it really quickly. There's a sort of a darker line here. Again, the paint's creeping into that wet. And see where else we've got some darker here. Here. There's that line where I think where the glass bottom is. I'm wondering, I'm wetting this, just wondering if I can get a minute transition from this into the wet. I think I can. I wet it first. And just put a little bit more colour along the top. So it goes down into just wet paper. So it's starting to look a little bit glass-like. Maybe a little bit more dark here. Oh, and don't forget, I want to have a little bit, going to have a little bit of that reflected green in the shadow. There, so if I'm just going to add a little bit of dark to that there. So if I've done that twice, I think you probably should be close to catching up with me there. I've got two of them on the go. Put them like that. My reference photo. So when I dried the bottle, I also dried the flower, probably enough. And so we could work on, if you dried yours too, you could work on the leaves next. If you didn't dry your flower, then give it a, if you do have a high hairdryer, it will need a tiny bit of drying because it might, I don't know, it might still be wet enough that your purple might bleed into your green, which you definitely don't want, because it's such a small amount of greenery that you want it to be very definite and very bright. So make sure your purple flower is dry before you start the greenery. And I'm just going, I think, yeah, I just mixed my azo yellow and cobalt blue to get that light green. You can use whatever light green you like. If you have a sap green, you can use that. Totally up to you, whatever light green you like. I'm just going to use my azo yellow. I'm going to mix a little bit of cobalt blue with that. And I don't want it too dark. I want them to be nice and vibrant. I will add a little bit more dark green when I've painted the first layer. I want a very tiny brush, number 2 brush. Let's zoom in. We have so little greenery that we don't need to fuss too much with it. I'm going to put in the green leaves that are sticking out. And you can see I made a really light yellowy green, and it still looks quite dark when I get it on the paper here. So because it's that, I want it that light to start with, but I also want to have some dark green on those leaves too. So I'll be adding just a little bit of ultramarine blue to that green mix. Let's bring it over. There's my light green mix. Don't want to add ultramarine blue to all of it because I want to use a bit of it to do the other flower. And just half of that's getting a little bit more dark green made with the ultramarine blue, and just going to add some darker leaves as well. In the photo the leaves are very, very dark. That's that one. I've got to do my other one. Bring my other one in there. And this is at least this one in the photo is quite light on the top, which is nice. We have that nice light bright green. Let's get some of those top leaves in. They're kind of nice and curly and wispy. Get those in. And of course I'm going to switch to my darker blue just to add some darker accents to them. Some of them are darker on the end, I guess the way the light's catching them. So I'm just going to add my dark on the end, and it can bleed back into the lighter green, that's okay. Add just some little ragged leaves. And then after that we want to work on the stem. Now the stem is an interesting colours. Very little green on the stem. If you look, let's even zoom in a little bit more. The top of the stem looks very rosy brown to me, like a rosy colour, going down into a sort of a violet green mix here. And as of course it goes through the vase, it's more of a vase colour mixed with the violet-y green mix. So that's sort of how we're going to work it. We're going to start with kind of a rosy brown mix. We're going to transition, we're going to mix the green with the violet mix, and you can actually see a little bit of green here. So we can put a little bit of green on and a little bit of violet on and let them mix on the paper. But it's an interesting colour variation. This is the photo we're looking at here, not my painting. So we definitely are not doing green stems. They have a lot more violet in than they do green and pink. So the stem, this one is definitely much, much stronger. So while you're working, I might work on that, on making my dark colour a bit more green, a bit more strong. I think when I'm working with all of you, I'm careful not to go too strong with a lot of the colours. Now that's it. I've added a little bit more phthalo green in with my mix. I'll show you here. And I'm going to strengthen up some of the colours that I have in my vase. I'm just looking at my other one, it's too weak, before I move on to the stem. I'm going to use my clean damp brush to soften that in. I put a bit of the paint on, wash my brush, just soften that colour down. And definitely in the neck of the bottle, I need a bit more strength in the colour. See, when I come around this side of the vase, I'm putting a little bit more Prussian blue with my mix, because it seems more blue on this side. And I think that's a lot better. A bit more colour. Yeah, I am definitely liking that a little bit more. The darker you go with some of these accent colours, the whiter the reflections look. Oh. Right, and we're going to darken up this other one too. I'm going to make a valiant attempt to soften this up in here and have that light still coming up in there. Only way you can soften things is with a wet brush or a damp edge. Again, let's just wet this and have a little bit more colour coming down into the glass jar. I want it to seep down into the wet paint. There, a bit more colour. And this is so hard because this shape that I want to have in there is just seeping down into the wet paint. Really, I think actually I have Saunders Waterford paper, which is beautiful cotton paper, but it's softer than the Arches paper. It's not as sized as this Arches paper, and the water really seeps into it more. I'm not used to that. The Arches is much better for allowing you to do wet in wet and have really strong sizing on it. There, I did manage to pull it back a little bit with a damp brush, but it's tricky, really tricky. I'm just trying to get that reflected shape in there. Anyway, so I've got lots more colour on those two bottles, a lot more phthalo green in there to make it look more glass-like. So I'm going to I'm going to dry everything again before I work on the stems, because I definitely don't want the stems bleeding into the glass colour. And I want it nice and dry before we put the really, really dark accents on. We've got to put these really dark accents on. Want to get those lines nice and sharp for nice hard edges to the glass. So another drying session for me. Right, that should be good and dry. So I want to work on the stems next. I'm going to start at the top with the rose, and then I'm going to add some green, and they will blend wet in wet, which will make the rose go darker. And I will then add some of the violet to the green, so I'll get this wet in wet transition. I don't mind if it doesn't work really well. I'm going to have all those colors just mixing wet in wet on there, and that will be fun. So small brush, I'm going to go with my number 2 brush. Let's zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to start with the rose. And I'm going to put the rose coming out, and it'll look very, very bright. And I'm going to put it here. And don't worry about it looking bright, because even if the green doesn't blend into it and make it browny color naturally, you can go over it with a darker color later and you'll still have some pink rose highlights in there or underneath. So let's come down here with this is the green, the dark green that I made for the leaves, the one that I made with Ultramarine Blue and the Cadmium Yellow. So I'm going to just tease that up on the underneath of the curve into the rose and down to where it goes into the vase. Don't need to do the whole stem at once. There's places where we can stop and then get to the next bit. So I'm going to put that in. Now you can see the green is creeping up into the rose here. I can push it up a little bit more. And now I want to get one of the violets that I made, probably one of the mid sort of violets. I think it was the magenta and the cobalt blue. Doesn't really matter which one. And wet in wet, I'm going to put that violet into the green. Just here and there, especially at the base where it goes into the jar. And maybe just around the curve there. And you can see already all those colors are mixing wet in wet on the paper and making a variety of colors that you actually see in the stem. The pink's no longer looking as pink as it did. When it's dry, I want to clean up that curve a little bit, but right now I want to leave it while it's wet, and I'll clean that up later. So then we have a little bit of the stem going in here. So we want it a little bit more watery as it goes through there, so not as distinct. So I want to put same method for going in here. I want to put the green on first, watered down a little bit, and then get a little bit of violet and put a little bit of violet on there. Let it mix with the green. And to make it, I watered it down a bit to make it less distinct. And then I'm also sucking a little bit of the paint up with a thirsty brush just to make it not as strong as the one that you see out of the vase. We're going to do the same thing all the way down, just slowly coming down. I want to add a little bit more cobalt blue to the green, because if it's inside the glass, it's going to have more of a bluey tinge to it. So I've added a little bit more cobalt blue to the green. It's a little bit refracted here, so it's got a bit of a curve coming down. and sort of reflects out here a little bit. I've got just the green on. Now I'm going to get the lilac on my little brush and add the lilac to the stem. Now you can kind of see why I left the stem white, because if I had covered the stem with the Phthalo Blue, Phthalo Green colour in the background, I couldn't have got these colour transitions. They would have been totally overwhelmed by the Phthalo Green mix and they wouldn't have worked. And now the last one is a little bit more green than the other ones, so it's quite green at the base coming up. Got to water it down a little bit more. I just put some water on my brush to dilute it out a little bit. And a little bit of the lilac coming from the top down. I want to pull that down a little bit straighter there. So you can see it's stronger up the top here and then a little bit more diluted as it comes through the glass. And there's no reason you can't add the odd dark accent like here and there. As this is, it will dry really quickly because it's small. So I've got a little bit of lilac, just adding a little bit of lilac accent here and there. And I've got green and lilac on my brush, just dipping in the green, dipping in the lilac. I just want to clean this curve up on the stem here. And there are like little sort of dark patches on the stem. Sorry, I lost my track of thought there while I was painting. So here and there are little dark patches. I'm just putting those on. I'll pull back so you can see the whole stem in the vase. And then of course, once we get all the dark accents in on the vase, it will look even better. What I do want to do is, I have my shadow with the grey and a little bit of the bluey green colour. I want to get the lilac that is the rose with the cobalt, and I want it quite watery on my brush. This is very delicate operation, this, and I just want to pull a little bit of that there. So see how little that is, and wet brush and just put it out there. What I want is kind of a little reflection of that violet flower just here, just tiny. Like, we're not talking hardly noticeable, almost nobody will notice that hardly. I'm going to do a little bit more just here, just like that. It's so delicate, but it's one of those important little things that gives it something, makes it stand out a little bit. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other one here. Same method. When I'm looking at this picture, this is quite dark as it comes through the vase here, so I'm going to go quite dark there, and then it's really pale as it goes through the light, and then pale and refracted and so forth. So same method, I'm just going to sort of work on the lights and darks a little bit. So I start with my rose and put that at the top. And get my green. And continue on down and let the green come up into the rose. Just sometimes you just have to like tap it. Just like tap your brush on the wet rose and you'll get enough green in it. Same with the lilac. I'm going to the magenta and cobalt lilac, the slightly darker violet. I've got it on my brush. And I'm just going to tap it on there. Just put a little bit of that violet. Now, like I said, when it comes down into the vase, it's much, much darker. So I'm actually, what I do is, I have my little number 2 brush and I load it with some violet like this. And then I touch it in the green. So I've loaded it with violet and green. And I want to make this part much darker. Need a bit more violet on there. Or you can touch it into the rose and the green because you'll get a nice brown color with that as well. And we have a reflection break, and then that same color, quite dark, coming out after the reflection break. And then it lightens up. So what I'm going to do is wash my brush. I'm going to have just water on my brush. And I'm going to pull this, oh, I need a little bit of green, tiny little bit of green on my brush. And I'm going to just pull that down with a little bit of water, a little bit of green on my brush. So it gets lighter as it goes through the water. And like I say, you can put a little bit more color on if it seems a bit too light. I get a little bit of violet, a little bit more color on here. And then there's sort of a reflection here. I've got green and violet on my brush, a little bit of both. And I come down here. Start with the greeny violet as I come down here. And I'm going to finish with green on my brush. So wash it, get a bit of green, and finish this one coming down with the green. Maybe a little touch there. So it's quite a process, isn't it, the stem? The stem, I think, is one of the most interesting parts of the whole painting because you have that lovely transition from rose to violet to green. And when that's dry, you can put a few little accents in if you need to. That's okay. Mixing the actual violet with the green makes a really lovely color. Put a little bit more on that one. So now the sort of final step is to get on all of these lovely dark areas. And there's one more thing I want to do, which I did on the other one. Remember, I add a little bit of that violet in the shadow, just a little bit. You don't really see it in the photograph. This is where the artist comes in and adds something. And adding just a little bit of violet into the shadow. Just because I want to. Not because it's there in the photograph or anything like that. Right, so then we've got to get that lovely dark on the vase so that the whites and everything stand out. So let me just check my notes to see what I mixed it with. I know that I had a lot of colours. I used Prussian Blue and the Phthalo Green, and then I added the violet and a little bit of Payne's Grey. So you can either use dioxazine violet or your dark violet mix. My dark violet was the Quinacridone Magenta with the Phthalo Blue, so that was my dark violet. They got a lot of colours in there. And I don't usually use that many colours, but you want to go dark, but you want to have the colours of the vase in there. So you need the Prussian Blue and the Phthalo Green, and then you need to darken it up with the violet and possibly some Payne's grey. So don't waste paint on your palette. I've got lots of violet on my palette here. This is the dioxazine violet here, and this is the one with the phthalo blue and the magenta, so I can use either one. And to those I will mix, let's use this one that I mixed up. I can take a little bit of that dioxazine violet. I need to add some phthalo green to that and some Prussian blue. Look how dark Prussian is. I'm pretty sure most Prussian mixes do have some black in them. And add a little bit of that violet. And let's just test that. I haven't put any Payne's grey in it yet. Let's find my test strip. Oh. That's pretty dark. Could probably have a little bit more violet in it. Let's grab some of this. Got 2 batches there, I got lots, look. And I am going to add just a touch of Payne's grey. There, I think that's nice and dark. A little bit more phthalo green, so I've got the greeny colour of the glass in the dark. And let's test that. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's good and dark. And that's going to do it. It's almost in the, you know, if you look at the photograph, it's almost black. So you want to be pretty dark, and the Payne's grey will help you get there and sort of neutralize the color a little bit. Right, so we're going to want a small brush though, because these are small details. We want your number 2 brush. Now come in tight so you can sort of see. And we need to make sure that my stem dried really, really quickly. It was on dry paper, so I think it's going to be fine. We don't get too close to the stem. So let's roll my number 2 brush in that nice dark mix we just made. And if I don't want to get too close to the stem for now, I can start somewhere else. Now on this one that I'm looking at, we have dark here at the side, and we have it very dark at this side, and some on here. So let's start a little bit away from the stem just to be careful, as we can come back to it. And I want to get, just think about shapes. It's shapes right now you're doing. You're making this shape that you see here. If you stick with the shapes that you see, you really can't go wrong. Get that dark in. Now, it's fairly dark across the top, the neck, or shoulders, I guess, of this bottle. I'm going to get my wet brush, and I just want to ease that darkness across the shoulder of the bottle here. And there's a little spot here, a little spot here. And I don't have to rush. I can come back and put any dark on later if I need to. There is a dark line coming down here and coming around here. I'm over here, dark line here. Down here, there is a dark line here and one here. And of course, if you're doing a different vase, your dark lines will be in a slightly different place. And then this side of the neck of the bottle here, pretty dark. And there is quite a bit of white there that I might put in later with some P.H. Martin's white. And then again, this this dark kind of goes to a lighter grey along the shoulder. So I've got a wet brush and I'm going to drag that dark out into this part. Because it's not so dark. Just dragging it out and around there. Okay, so down around the edge here and here, it kind of points in like this from here. And it comes nice and dark down this edge. And then the other dark on this side is not quite as dark. So what I need to do is dilute that dark mix out a bit with some, and I've got this here and I'm adding some water just here. I'm adding a little bit of violet, a little bit of water here, because I don't want some of these shadows to be quite as dark. They're kind of grey. And they are kind of dark, but not as dark as those really dark bits. And there's a big reflection in between them and down here. And then they do start to get a little bit darker, just here and here. And coming around kind of here. And coming underneath here, underneath there, they're even lighter. So I'm putting in I know it looks scary, you get these darks on, you're like, oh my goodness, they're too dark. But look how they're almost black in the photograph. So you've got to have a little bit of courage with them. This side is not quite as dark, so I've diluted it a little bit. Just here. Added a little bit of water to the dark. And there's a dark spot behind the stem. And I think, pretty sure my stem is dry enough to put that dark spot behind the stem and a little dark spot in front of it too. Got my wet brush and I'm just going to soften some of them a little bit like that. Now the bottom is quite dark too. I want to add a little bit more Prussian blue to one of them, a little bit more blue for the bottom. And this one, the base coming along here. Still want a little bit more blue with it, a bit more Prussian blue. And there are some white spots showing. Might not be able to paint around all of them, might have to add some later. We'll do our best. And this must be a very flat bottle vase because it has a very flat bottom and you don't see that very often. But I'm doing what I see. So I'm just going by what I see in the photograph. And try and get a nice straight line that curves up on the bottom there. And again, I'm diluting it out a little bit because I just want to get a little bit more shading on the side here, even a bit more than they show in the photo, because we need to get that edge nice and straight. Wet brush to help a little bit. Now the bottom's probably not quite dark enough and I might need to come back with a little bit of dark. That's okay, I can do a second layer. I know the stem must be dry enough now to come and work around the stem. So we've got to have a very sharp edge on this side. And then the black edge comes pretty much all the way around. It's a tiny reflection. You have to kind of, oops, I got a big blob of colour where I don't want it. You have to kind of really work with these shapes that you see, because it's these odd shapes in reflections that really make them look like reflections. What do I do about that big blob that I just made? Let's see if we can get a Kleenex. I had a Kleenex at one point, it's fallen on the floor. Let's see if we can wash that blob of paint out before it dries. It's all staining colour, so it's highly unlikely, but you never know. Best thing to do is don't panic. It's not in an area where I could put white or anything like that. It's in an area where you're going to see it. So I'm going to try, the more I try and get my Kleenex in there, the worse it gets. Yeah, it's going to get worse and worse. It's going to be a feature of my painting. It'll be a little watercolour feature in there. Nothing you can do about staining colours, they just stain. Okay, where was I? Oh, I was doing this part up here, wasn't I? And there is a little bit of the stem reflecting in there too that I should have put in. It's reflecting in there, but I'll put it in when this is a bit more dry. And let's pull back a little bit. And I could also, like I said, the violet has dried much lighter now. So I could put a little bit more dark violet in if I wanted to. If I wanted to have a little bit more drama in the flower. I've got the dioxazine violet now because it's very, very quick to mix. Don't have to mix a colour, I've got it right there. And maybe put a little bit more dark on the flower so it has that lovely sort of chrysanthemum texture. I've got a wet brush to just kind of work that in. And it's amazing how much lighter the violet has dried. Since I put it on there, it looks so dark when I put it on there. And like I said, even this here is a little bit too light. And I think it's dry enough that I can put a bit more. bit more dark on there. This side is very, very light in the photograph. It feels a bit too unbalanced in my painting somehow. Maybe soften that off a bit. I think because it just feels a little bit unbalanced in the painting, I'm going to add a little bit more dark down that side, just because it's not a photograph. I do have to make some adjustment. I've just added a little bit more colour down that side. I'm just using the very dark colour that I mixed up, but diluting a little bit with some water. And those are all judgments that you just have to make as you're working. You can't always have it exactly like the photograph. Sometimes it's got to be a painting and you have to make some adjustments. And I think that looks a little bit better. I put a little bit more dark on that side and a bit more dark at the base too. And a big blob of dark where I didn't want any. You know what, when it's dry, it's quite possible I could scrub a bit of that out successfully. A little bit more shadow in there. Right, so I got the darks on that one. I still have another one. I don't know how you're doing with yours, but I'm going to just try a little bit of dark on here. I'm going to try it without the blobs of paint where I didn't want them. See if I can achieve that. And of course the stem is very dry on this one, so I will start with the rim up here because the stem's nice and dry. Get that good dark rim of the bottle in. Why am I not talking so I don't make a mistake with the paint? I'll zoom in so you can see any mistakes close up here. I like putting in the last dark accents. I often can't wait to get to that bit. It's kind of exciting. It's when it all comes together. It's always very tempting to put them in too early, actually. You really have to discipline yourself and wait. I'm looking at the photo and there's quite a light area right up that edge there. that I want to try and capture. And then of course there are the light grey transitions between the dark and the light. I'm going to mix a little bit more violet with the dark, so it's a bit more violet and not quite so bluey greeny, the dark. I have to go really slow because, you know, if you make a mistake with the dark, like, you can't undo it. I have to make sure you get everything in the right place. Really take your time, be very careful with where you put the paint. As this one comes to the base, there's some quite strong reflections. So that's what I'm being very careful about, trying to leave those, not lose them, you know, because just one brush stroke sometimes and you kind of lost your reflection. And it kind of comes around here. And there's quite a strong dark shadow across here and then around here. And then there's a very light line just at the base. And then these parts here where it transitions from flat base to curved sides, they have some very interesting shapes. So I'm being very, very careful to try and really get those shapes in to make it look like reflective glass. And also the curve of the glass. There's some very dark here. It comes around from the side. And a little bit dark here. I'm going to make it a little bit darker than it is. And then we've got to get this curve coming down here. There's sort of a curve that comes on the inside here. I think the base of these must be very thick. And then it's kind of a curve on the outside too. Easy to lose your way in all these odd little reflections. I'll kind of come across here. Nearly there. We're nearly there. It's got a little bit more to do on this side. I know I haven't done all 3 vases, but you know, the method is the same. You just have to look at your photo to see where your reflections are. I got to get this down here. Come around here. And I'm going to lighten up that and water down that dark, because there's some dark on the edge here, but it's not as dark as that dark. So I just watered it down a little bit to lighten it. Now I'm going to lighten it, I'm going to water it down to lighten it even more, because I want some just here and kind of wiggling in here where the stem is. I'll get my bigger brush. And where I just put that here, I just want to blend that in with my bigger brush. And I think I got the lilac shadow on there, yep. And I got the blue shadow on there. That's all the shadows in. Let's pull back a little bit. And sometimes it's so easy to miss something out when you're concentrating on everything, concentrating really hard, and you tend to sometimes miss things. Like on this one thing I had to do was add, I'm going to get a little bit of green and purple on my brush together, and I just missed out a little bit of reflection in the rim here. I just put a little bit of green and purple on my brush together, like I dipped in the green, dipped in the purple. And I'm also going to just add a little bit more definition to that stem in places. Just to give a few more little details to it. And then let's have a look at this flower. I think that flower is pretty okay. It's got a little bit more dioxazine violet, deep violet, and I could still have a little bit more depth in this one, just in here. I'm going to put the violet on, and I've got my wet brush. I'm going to dab it in a little bit, get the look of those petals. And let's have a think. How are we doing? I'm going to have another look at the photo. Make sure, I think I need a little bit more definition on this stem. Again, dipping in the green, dipping in the purple. A little bit darker here. A bit darker there maybe. And that's about it, I think. Okay, let's pull right back. Let's see, we've got a couple of them done. I'm glad I did the third layer of the darker green on the glass. I think it really, really needed that. And I do think, looking back, that I liked the more greeny grey that I made for the background, even though it looked sort of, that's the thing, when you have it in isolation, it looked too green in isolation. But when you have it with the rest of the composition, with all the other green and the purple, it looks okay. And I think I don't like the grey that I made with this one as much as I like the greeny grey that I made. And the photograph's sort of right in between the two of them, isn't it? And a bit darker. The photograph's a bit darker, but photographs are not watercolors. You can't always go with the same values that you see in the photo. So we're done pretty much on time. That's not bad. And I really liked this one. I surprised myself. I wasn't sure, and then I was surprised how much I liked it with all those sort of. So how did your vases turn out? I left all my little mistakes in there so you can see that even if we've been painting for a long time, we still make mistakes, and I make a lot when I'm talking and teaching because I can't concentrate 100%, but never mind, I put them in there. We learn to deal with them, bits of splatter and watercolor. It's not an exact science, it's art. So I hope your picture turned out really well, and I hope you're pleased with it. And join me again next week when we'll be painting a kingfisher. I was going to say kingfisher, then I remembered it's a European kingfisher, so it's slightly different to the North American one that some of you know. So see you next week. Thanks for joining me.